Happy to see you all back, and I guess this is something we've all been waiting for last few weeks, last few months, right?
Right. So we have a very special guy who is about to jump on the stage. And after yesterday, probably everyone now knows what is Yelp, right?
Yes.
And now everyone knows what is Uber, right?
Right.
So let's give it up to Oliver, who is managing the whole engineering infrastructure in US market and Lithuania, right?
Yep. They have an office in Lithuania, so a round of applause to Oliver that's presented by LRT.
Yes.
Enjoy.
Thanks, guys. Hi, so yeah, my name is Oliver Nicholas. I'm an engineering manager at a reasonably successful startup called Uber Technologies. We're based out of San Francisco. We're an on-demand transportation app. I've seen a very scary, very similar service coming out of Lithuania now here in Taxify. And I've had the chance to be here in Vilnius for a week. I got in on Tuesday. We have an engineering team here. We're hiring, by the way, and I've had an amazing time. I've been really impressed with the people that I've met here, and it's been awesome. So thank you for having me here. So I want to talk today about something I feel like I've identified as like the single most important quality that I've seen in small early engineering teams. I've been lucky enough to be part of a couple very successful teams, and I think I've noticed something. And so I apologize if this reads a little bit more like a graduation speech than a how-to. But I think a lot of you are probably getting ready to graduate soon and looking to figure out what you're going to do, and hopefully it's helpful. So I might talk a little fast because I want to get through it, and I might yell at you a little because I want to get my point across. But so you guys probably know who Steve Ballmer is. He was, until recently, he was like the CEO of Microsoft, and he's famous for that reason. But there was this clip that went really viral, showed up on the YouTube a couple years ago, and he's at this like developer conference, and he's like roaming back and forth across the stage, and he's like sweating really profusely, and he's just yelling, "Developers, developers, developers, developers!" And he's like, it's like terrifying to watch. He's like a bear, and so I'm trying not to do that. I'm gonna try and make a little bit more sense than that. But he is displaying the quality kind of that I'm talking about here. Without further ado, the quality that I'm talking about is fierceness. It is being fierce. So if you look this up in the dictionary, you'll find a definition of fierce that's like violent, eager to fight or kill, having a savage or violent nature. So this is not quite what I mean, but we use this exact phrase at Uber as one of our sort of evaluation criteria, and so we're going to redefine the word a bit. I apologize for everyone for whom English is not the first language, but I love language and we like playing with it a bit. So we're going to look at a nuance. So by fierce here, what I really mean is a quality of caring about what is the right thing to do, and of speaking up for it, and of debating your views honestly, and of sticking to your guns when your experience tells you to, and really of caring deeply that things are done the right way. So another way to think about this is a fierce regard for quality. This is attending to details, the fine edges, the fine points that make something both worth using and better than everybody else's version of it. So I have a favorite example of this. There are many, but kind of an obvious example of this is Steve Jobs, and Apple as a company. But really, Apple exhibited this through Steve Jobs' leadership. People talk about Apple now about how it's a lifestyle brand, it's a style, it's an image, and it's an aesthetic. It's fancy, and that is certainly true. But Apple was not always regarded this way. Originally, it was an outcast for decades. and it was on the sidelines. It was a minor player. And so the original Mac, which is what this is Steve Jobs introducing the original Mac in 1984. So this thing was, sure, it was cool looking, I guess, but like computers in 1984 weren't cool in any way. They weren't cool looking. Nobody cared what they looked like, really. And people certainly weren't buying them to look cool. They sat on your desk. They didn't really represent your personal brand in any way. There wasn't that sort of association. But the reason I think that the Apple became associated with stylish people, with like trend setting, with artists, with creators, with the misfits, if you remember that ad campaign, is because those people were people who had a finely tuned sense for quality, who appreciated quality, who could recognize excellence. And these machines were excellent. They were incredibly refined. I can't even go through all the details, but to somebody who cared about that excellence, who thought it was important that the devices that they use and the interfaces that they interacted with were smooth, and felt like they'd been put together by somebody who cared, these Macs and their operating systems were the best in the world. They absolutely nailed it. And how did they nail it? Steve Jobs was fierce about the quality of these devices. There are tons of stories about how he would just berate his engineers and berate his product people and berate his marketers. I mean, he was a cruel boss, I think. But he cared that the experience was as good as it could be. And so all those details that he worried about, and specifically in this case, there was a big thing about how the fonts for the first Mac, he had taken a typography class in college, and he had learned all about kerning and alignment and all about like font spacing. So he spent weeks, months with the team, like forcing them to perfect the typography on the Mac. And it was a bunch of people who didn't think it really mattered. And Steve Jobs was like, "This matters." And the thing is that like all those little qualities, they add up to a whole that's worth using. That's better than everybody else's. You don't even consciously know that they exist, but they're there and you can feel them. You can feel the qualitative difference. You can take, I'm a car guy. You can take somebody who doesn't know anything about cars except how to drive one, and you can have them drive like a mile in a Kia, and you can have them drive a mile in a Mercedes-Benz, and they can tell you which one is better. Like intuitively, they can tell you. So how do we apply this to startup engineering, which is my specialty? I've only ever really worked at startups. I started my career out 2 weeks before I graduated university in California. I realized like, oh, I should get a job, and so I went on Craigslist, which is what you did in that place and time. And I found this little incubator called Ooga Labs, which has been formed by some successful entrepreneurs in the Valley. And I came down for this interview with them, and I discovered that this company was like 4 guys crammed into a little room that was big enough for like exactly 4 guys, and I was going to be the 5th guy. And by the time I left 2 years later, we had grown more than 4x. We'd moved offices 3 times. And we'd had a couple of small successes with our businesses that we were starting. And so 2 years into my career, I was like, oh, I know what growth is. I know what this looks like. And then I went and joined Yelp. And at the time, I was the 9th engineer to join Yelp. The whole company was about 100 people, though. And in the 5 years that I was there, we took over 6 more floors of the building that we were in. We 10x'd in size. We 10x'd our monthly unique traffic. We went from 5 million monthly uniques to 80 million monthly uniques or something. At one point, I was literally the only engineer working on the front end of this product. But by the time I left, there were over 200 engineers. So at any rate, 5 years later, I was like, okay, now I think I know what growth is. Now I think I know what it means to be successful as a company. And then at Uber, which I joined 2 years ago, I was the 2nd engineering manager. I interviewed in August 2012, and there were 18 engineers. And I started 2 months later, and there were 30 engineers. And I was like, what the hell happened here? Like, what's going on? And in the 2 years that I've been there, we've gone from 100 employees total to over 1,600 employees total. We're in 45 countries. We're in over 215 cities. We have at least 250 engineers. I can't really say exactly what our traffic growth is, but we double our revenue every 6 months. We've been doing that for a long time, and it's sort of like if you collapse down Yelp's 5-year growth into 1 year, you start to get an idea of what Uber's traffic growth looks like. So now, as you can imagine, I really think I know what what growth looks like. So who knows what comes next? Maybe it comes out of Vilnius, but it's out there. So none of these businesses were my idea in any way, shape, or form. I didn't start them, but I've watched them be successful, and I've gotten to participate in it. And I've identified that I think that fierceness is this common quality, especially in early teams and in founders, that accelerates these companies and sustains them, sets them up for success. But I'm an engineer, so I want to talk about this from an engineer's perspective. So I want to talk about fierceness in engineering. How do you have a fierce regard for quality in your software, and why do you bother? Because it's probably well established why you have a fierce regard for quality in your product, in the thing that your users see. Why is it important that you have to apply this to the back end, to the code? So we're going to go through. I'm just going to outline these, and we'll dive in. First up, you have to be fierce about the quality of the code specifically. Your product is crap if it doesn't work, as well as if nobody can understand how it works. Sure, like Twitter kind of got famous for going down all the time because the code didn't work that well. But Ian McFarlane, who was up here yesterday, pointed out that this is part of one of the reasons that Friendster failed, is because the site went down all the time. So it can definitely work against you. You need to be fierce about collecting data. This is something that's up to engineers to make sure that you take care of this from the beginning. You have to collect every single shred of data that's generated by your app. Early stage companies, to be successful, they have to iterate. And in order to iterate, you have to have the data. You can't do it effectively if you don't have the information to iterate on. It's madness to do this otherwise. You're performing experiments blind. And then you have to be fierce about learning from your mistakes. This is my favorite topic, actually. There's a quote by George Santayana. He says, those who can't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And so this is really about learning from your mistakes and making sure that you're not wasting your time. Okay, so we'll talk about code quality. Why is this something to be fierce about? If you're doing something of any reasonable complexity, your code, and this is the code that you write, that your engineers write, that you went out and raised real good money to pay people to write, it's going to be one of your primary assets, right? You can spend anywhere from $40,000 to $200,000, and you can hire an engineer and you can put them in a room for a year and have them write code. And at the end of that year, they come out, and what have they produced? There's nothing there. There's nothing physically there. There's just a computer. They have an editor there with a text file and a bunch of squiggly marks in it. But this is modern day alchemy, because those squiggly marks are better than gold. So if nothing else, you should be fierce about your code quality, because you're paying good money for it. You don't want to pay good money and produce something of substandard quality. This is just good business sense, but really, like, why do we have to do this? Excellence is a habit, right? We have to do this because quality is infectious. If you demand quality from your fellow engineers, not only are they going to produce good-looking code, but it's going to operate well, and it'll have fewer bugs, it'll run more efficiently, and it'll only require 2 servers to run instead of 10. So right there, if people are writing more efficient code, if they're spending the time to make it better, you're going to save money right off the bat running it. You need code that stands the test of time, so that you don't have to rewrite it every month. Code that's easy to refactor once it has outlived its usefulness, which is absolutely going to happen. So how do you get fierceness? How are you fierce about your code quality? How do you improve the quality of your code? Absolutely, the main thing that you have to do is make sure that you are doing code review of every piece of code that your company writes. Somebody writes it, somebody reviews it. At least one person reviews it. That also helps you establish a measure of consistency across your code base. And this means things like being really stringent about spelling mistakes in the comments in your code. About the formatting, the paragraphing of the code, the scope of your functions. You apply that like Steve Jobs practice of making sure those pixels look right to the way the code looks, which sounds totally insane to somebody who's not having to work in the code because it's like it just runs, the computer doesn't care. But in the long run, this is going to save you programmer time, which will save you money. And that's what successful companies need to do, especially early on, right? You have to save your money. And this matters once you get bigger, right? So if you have to rewrite your whole code base once a year, 5,000 lines at the end of the first year, it's fine, whatever. If you have to do it at the end of the second year and you've got 50,000 lines of code to rewrite, okay, that's going to like take you some time. By the end of the third year, if you have 500,000 lines of code that you have to rewrite, this is going to be a serious hit to your business. So you deal with this early on, and you make sure that your engineers know that it's not acceptable that we cut corners. You have to make exceptions for the business. You're running a business, obviously. You can't take all the time to write the most perfect code in the world, but you have to be pragmatic about it. So there's this great example of this that I like. It was in a blog post that was written by a guy named Steve Yegi, who's a big server-side JavaScript guy. He was an engineer at Amazon and then at Google. And he's a big blogger, and he wrote this blog post on Google+, which is like maybe the only interesting thing that ever was written on Google+. And ironically, he wrote it as an internal memo at Google and couldn't figure out the privacy controls properly, and so it was shared publicly with the whole world. And in this post, he's like ripping Google to shreds. He's ripping the company culture apart, talking about all the things that they're doing wrong that they should be doing better, and it's from business practices to engineering culture. I encourage you to look it up if you haven't read it. But so in this article, he's talking about how his old employer, how Amazon and Jeff Bezos specifically has this fierce attention to details, and how they sort of like from the CEO to be telling the engineers how to do their jobs at a company that's thousands of people is sometimes a little crazy, but it worked out well for them. So this is reproduced a little bit here, but I'll go through. He's quoting. So this is Steve Yegi writing an article for Google, and he's quoting an email that had come out by Jeff Bezos, the CEO, and this had gone out to the entire engineering org. And he basically this is Jeff Bezos inventing Amazon's service-oriented architecture. So the email comes out and it says, all teams will henceforth expose their data and functionality through service interfaces. You have to communicate with each other through these interfaces. You can't communicate any other way than through these interfaces. I don't care what technology you use to accomplish this. All service interfaces have to be designed from the ground up to be externalizable. This is crazy. He literally, like the CEO told every engineer, like engineers know how to do their jobs. He told the engineers, I don't care how you think you should do this. You write your services so that we could make them public if we wanted to. The public has to be able to access every single back-end service in our company. That's totally insane. And then lastly, anybody who doesn't do this gets fired. So he was pretty serious about it. And this was around 2002, but this was the spark for Amazon's service-oriented architecture, and it became the foundation of Amazon Web Services, which is like a $5 billion a year business now. And it's also the biggest challenge that Google has ever had. I mean, Google's competitive advantage for a long time has been their ability to run giant infrastructures, millions of machines, better than anybody else in the world. And Amazon has started to figure it out because they built this business about exposing their infrastructure to the world. It forced them to get better at this. And this is all about Jeff Bezos like being a jerk, having that kind of like, I'm going to get in there, I'm going to micromanage, I'm going to be fierce, and I'm going to be serious about the details. So that's about code quality. We'll talk about collecting data. You have to be startups are fragile. They require this constant tweaking that I mentioned, iteration, tuning. You can't do this if you don't have the data in the first place. So if you go and pay $1,000 to place some ads and you get some click traffic out of it, if you don't have access, like click logs or whatever, or Google Analytics tags on the pages for your site, sure, maybe you're like recording how many sales you got at the end, like the end of your funnel, but you have no idea how to optimize the process because you didn't collect the data from the middle where people fell out of your funnel. You don't know if it's the first page, you don't know if it's the second page, and so essentially you've wasted your $1,000. Yes, you got some sales out of it, but your point here is to be growing your business. And if you don't have the data to grow your business, you're screwed. So unless you got $1,000, $1 per click, and you got 1,000 clicks, and you got 1,000 sales out of that, you've really you've lost an opportunity here. So this sort of seems like common sense, I guess, but why is it something you have to apply fierceness to? It's because you don't just record the obvious things. You can't just record your clicks. You want to record your IP addresses. You want to record the access logs from every single service, your auth logs. You want to record the phase of the moon for every purchase. You want to know all those details because you never know what dimension some important information is going to pop out of. And even if you're collecting more information than you can analyze or than you know what to do with, anything you think of, make sure it gets written down, in your logs, and then store it somewhere, and you'll figure out a way to process it later. There's an entire industry, lighting up right now around, the interpretation of big data, finding patterns in your data. You may not even have to do this. Somebody else might be able to do it for you, but they can't do anything for you if you haven't collected the data in the first place. And the problem is that if you don't do it up front, if you don't set up your system to record this data before it goes live, once the event happens, it's gone. It disappears into time, and you can never collect that data again. You have to spend more money to do the experiment again. One of my favorite examples of this is at my first company, at the incubator. We always iterated, we did these viral email invite flows, and we would come up with product ideas, and we would design the splash pages for these ideas. And then we'd put them online and drive traffic at them. And we would see who would sign up and who would invite their friends to come use the service. There was no service. We were literally just had a splash page that we were trying to get people to sign up for, and we would see how much success those ideas had. So so we were very serious about collecting every piece of the funnel and measuring our progress there. So the last topic here is one that's really near and dear to my heart, and that's about it's about learning from your mistakes. And this, I think, is this is how we learn, right? I mean, this is how we build knowledge. This is the essence of experience. And really, this is why going to a small company, starting your own company, has so much power, especially if you're younger, less experienced, early in your career, compared to going to a big company where the ways of doing things are already described. Because making mistakes, making your own decisions, determining whether or not they're mistakes, grokking the consequences, these are truly powerful. These are truly powerful ways to learn. It's the best way to learn. It's the essence of experience. So it's absolutely okay to make mistakes. It'll happen 5 times a day, and then it'll happen 10 times a day. Your infrastructure will go down. Your systems will go down. Peter Kovacs was talking yesterday, and he was talking about how at Prezi, if you hadn't, you weren't considered a real member of the team until you had caused a priority 1 outage. And that was your hazing. That's your introduction to the team. This is really common in Valley companies. You're expected to fail and to screw everything up once. I did it one of the sites we ran at the first company was a sort of a classified site, kind of a Craigslist type site, and we had a moderation queue for spam because we got a lot of spam. And on my second week there, I ran this SQL command, and I forgot to enter the where clause, and I flushed 20,000 spam messages onto the site. My second week at Yelp, I did a code push that used a feature of Python 2.5, but we were only on Python 2.4 in production, and I brought the entire site down. My second week at Uber, I made a change in a slave database instead of a master database, and I desynced the databases, and I corrupted the slave database. So these happen. It's fine for these to happen. But the thing is that you have to learn from them so that you only make these mistakes once. And you have to be really vigilant about this. If you keep making the same mistakes over and over again, you're wasting your time. You're not going to be able to progress. So the number one tool, my most important piece of advice, if I give you anything here, for learning from your mistakes, is not a 5-hour lecture about the necessity for proper backup procedures. It is not spending 6 hours writing a postmortem for the outage, although that's important to do to record your mistakes. And it's certainly not a taser gun to the gut, and it's not firing an employee. It's having a wiki. It's having a collaborative document, collaborative space for you to document what your company is doing, what your team is doing. This is a private internal thing. This is an example of Wikipedia, obviously not private or internal, but you should have one for your own team. And at Uber, I came to Uber, and it was 2 years into the history of the company, and there wasn't a wiki, and there was no central space. You had to ask somebody, hey, how do I do this? How do I do this? And it was like, whoa, we got to write all this stuff down. And so the front page of the wiki at Uber, it's got links to emergency contact information. We keep run books for how to operate our services. We keep new engineer documentation, how to set up your dev environment, all that kind of stuff. And this becomes this central place where we store everything. It also has links to our postmortems, so you can look up all the mistakes we've made in the past. And this is how we pass on what we've learned. And it's an extension of every engineer's brain, right? So you need one of these, and you have to be absolutely fierce about using it. You have to be vigilant about using this because you end up wasting time otherwise. If you have to answer the same question more than twice, then the third time you get asked the question, you should be writing it down in the wiki, and then you should write it down, and you should refer the person who asked you to the page on the wiki. And then when somebody asks them, they'll refer them to the page on the wiki. This is the way that you amplify your own knowledge and your team's knowledge to new members of the team and to old members who didn't necessarily have exposure to what you're talking about yet. There's a great story about Derek Sivers, who has founded a company called CD Baby. He was a sort of successful entrepreneur in the Valley and a big blogger. And he wrote a post about, it wasn't using a wiki, but it was about this sort of sharing of this institutional knowledge. So one of his company's big differentiators was their customer service. So one day, one of the customer service people comes and asks him, for the 10th time, hey, I've got this particular situation. The customer is bugging out about this, whatever the issue is. They want a refund. Should I give them a refund? And he realizes he's been asked this question a bunch of times. So he says, okay. And he stands up in the middle of the room, and he says, everybody stop what you're doing. He stops work for the whole company. He said, everybody come in, gather in close. And he has the person repeat the question. And then he explains his reasoning for his thought process on answering the question. And then he says to the assembled people, he says, next time this question comes up, apply the same process of reasoning that I'm using here, and then you can answer the question yourself, and you don't have to ask me. And I would take it a step further and say you write this down on the wiki as well. And then he says, and that's why I was able to, after a year of doing that, of every time a question came up the second time, explaining how we were answering it, I was able to move across the country and run the company from 3,000 miles away. So this is the way that you really, this is the way that you amplify the skills of any one person by making sure that you're documenting their learnings. And a big part of that is their learnings from their mistakes. You do experiments, you write down what your experiments were, and you write down what the output was. So this is my list of things to be fierce about. There are plenty others, and they're super important. You have to be fierce about customer service. You have to be fierce about privacy and security, absolutely. You have to be fierce about design, user experience. The point of communicating this is a lot of you are probably early on in your career, but and it applies there, and it certainly applies at small companies, but it applies at big companies as well. This is an incredibly defining characteristic of extremely successful entrepreneurs. My CEO, Travis Kalanick, is well known for dropping into the middle of a conversation that's on the developers list. Like, you forget that he's there. You don't even know that he's lurking, and because there's 200 plus people on this list, and every so often there'll be like this technical discussion going on, and Travis will just like drop a bomb in the middle of this conversation, and he'll say like, there doesn't need to be any discussion about this. Like, get in there, fix this thing immediately. And get out, and let's move on. And it's an incredible way that he can short-circuit a lot of these long discussions and just say, we don't need to discuss about whether or not we should do this the right way. We should just do it the right way, and then we can get on with our lives. So this is kind of this is the typography that Steve Jobs was working on for the first Mac. Being fierce about this, being you can't make up for a lack of talent with effort necessarily, right? You still have to be good. You still have to have skill, but you can acquire skill by being fierce about your studies, right? By always trying to improve. The point is that it's never enough to just say that it's fine the way it is, or it's good enough. The way that these companies, the way that Yelp differentiated itself, the way that Uber differentiated itself, was by going that extra mile, was by saying, once you have sort of a minimum viable product, was by saying, like, we have a modicum of success, we have a tiny bit of success, let's nail it. Let's do it better than anybody else has done, and let's take it to the next level. And then once you've achieved that, you can you have a moat. You have something that differentiates you that's going to take a competitor a while to figure out, because these fine details are hard to figure out. They take a lot of effort. This is my entreaty to be fierce in your early endeavors, and especially as you're building these products, as you're engineering new products, to dive in there on the details. So, thank you.
All right. So that was Oliver, and that was Uber. What do you think? How did it go? You got evaluated.
I have to evaluate?
You got evaluated.
It went all right. I think I made my point.
Did it go all right? Yeah. You're fine. You're done.
Thanks.